This webinar follows yesterday's training with Life Around the Table on their Eating Together Faithfully framework. While we are grateful to be together in this virtual space, this webinar is the result of another adaptation that needed to be made due to COVID. We started planning over a year ago for an in-person retreat to use the Eating Together Faithfully framework together, to go together deeply on this topic, where we could welcome you to campus, walk around the farm, be together, eat together, and also visit some sites where MTSO is in partnership in Central Ohio around food justice and these areas. But here we are to at least start the conversation in this way, and we're thankful for that. As some of us heard yesterday, Eating Together Faithfully emerged out of many questions, including this one. Why are folks having difficulty accessing good food when there seems to be farmland all around us? So let's add a similar one to lead us into today's training. Why are folks on this side of the street having a hard time accessing good food when there's a grocery store on that side of the street? This is a question that continually moves us to reflection and action together, and kept our brother, the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, awake. But I'll let him bring you into that story. Reverend Dr. Brown is the senior pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, the founding director of Arida's Cross Freedom School, and the founder of the Black Church Food Security Network, a multi-state alliance of congregations working together to inspire health, wealth, and power in the Black community. Amongst his accolades is the Food Justice Award by the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights and the Visionary of the City by Baltimore Magazine. As a visionary, community organizer, social entrepreneur, mentor, and preacher with a capital P, we are grateful that you are no stranger to us at MTSO and are eager to have you. As you listen, participants, be sure to add any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and also feel free to offer any comments or thoughts, or even give some amens to Heber as he talks in the chat box. Some of us from MTSO will have a brief time of response after he's done with his talk, and then we will move into Q&A time with the time remaining. With that, Reverend Dr. Heber Brown, welcome back.
Good morning to each of you, and grateful to be with you. Thank you, Kathy, for that warm welcome. And to all of you who are sharing, it's great to be with you. Some of you I know, so it's good to virtually be with you again, and others I've not had opportunity to connect with before today, but I'm grateful for the opportunity that we have right now. So family, a few things I want to lift up before I jump in and share. First, MTSO is my family, and I'm grateful for this platform, and I'll be remiss if I did not give God praise and thanks, not only for all of the wonderful people, Tim and Kathy and Jen, Elizabeth, for pulling this together, in addition to Grace, and thank you for your leadership and example, Grace and the rest of the team. But also I want to acknowledge and recognize one of the dearest mentors I have in my entire life, in the person of Reverend Dr. Dean Valerie Bridgman. I thank God for Dean Bridgman's life and the many fingerprints that she has placed upon my soul, and I am better because of it. So I'm going to try to, in a few moments, oh, there's my Dean. Hey, Dean. I didn't know you were here. Praise God. Amen. All right. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to share two different presentations. I want to begin by talking about some of the history and the context with respect to African-American religious traditions in connection with agriculture and farming and food. I want to start there, and then I want to flow into what we're doing more specifically with and through the ministry of the Black Church Food Security Network. I'm starting though with the history because it is very important. As you may be able to see over my shoulder, This is a piece of the ancestor altar that I have here in my office. And over my shoulder, there are people like Queen Nanny of the Maroons. There are people like Cecile Fatiman, who was very instrumental with respect to the revolution in Haiti or Haiti. Ida B. Wells, whose powerful pen challenged racist violence and terrorism and lynching in this country. Grateful for Ya Asantewaa, who was a leader in Ghana, fighting against the British for the freedom of her people. You also have my grandfather, Bishop Heber Brown I, who is a mighty ancestor now, and his baby sister, my great aunt Martha, who was born with a veil over her face. And down the country, that thinking, the saying, the phrase "born with a veil over the face" literally means that Aunt Martha was born with some of the birth sac still on her face, but it meant something in my family and in the community where my family grew up. That meant that the person would have spiritual insight, and Aunt Martha certainly did. Aunt Martha could point out spirits in the room just as clearly as you see in my face right now. And there are so many others that are on my ancestor altar. I take a moment to lift up the ancestors, because the ancestors are guiding my path, ordering my steps, and informing this work, and helping me to see that I am a part, a piece of a grand and great tradition. And it is a part of my charge from the ancestors to place spotlight upon this tradition, this ministry tradition, particularly in Black religious communities. I am charged to do this work, and I'm grateful for how the ancestors are pointing the path and pointing the way. And that's partly why I want to start with history today, as opposed to just jumping into what I'm doing, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it was not for those who came before me. And the truth be told, for so many of us, we probably could say the same thing. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing if it was not for those who came before you as well. So let me see if I can share my screen real quick and get this going. I'm gonna see if I can pull off 2 presentations this morning. Jen's gonna help me, because Jen has the anointing with timekeeping. And I'm just thanking God for Jen's anointing with respect to keeping a Black Baptist preacher on time. So I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna talk about Black religious communities, food sovereignty in Black religious communities. And let me see if I can, has contact information, but that'll come later as well. Black food sovereignty and Black religious communities. And family, as was said, Kathy said it in the beginning, feel free to share comments, shoot up some amens, some questions, some clarifications, pushbacks, whatever you got. I'm a call and response. So give me what you got as it comes. Don't feel like we have to wait necessarily just until Q&A time. So I'll try to keep my eye on the chat box too as I'm working through the presentation. I want to start with this, family. This is a statement that I first learned about 4 years ago when I attended the Civil Rights Institute and Museum in Birmingham, Alabama. Wonderful, wonderful museum. And I was going because I wanted to learn more about the bus boycotts and everything, and the wonderful movement in Birmingham and in Alabama, broadly concerned. But I stumbled upon this statement on the wall. They had newspaper headlines and clippings on the walls to really give you a sense of what the thinking was of that time, what the conversation was like, and what the reaction of the power structure was to these Black people who had organized in Birmingham to push back against injustice and to reach forward into a greater degree of self-determination for themselves and for their community. I found this statement from the then mayor of Birmingham quite astonishing, Mayor Arthur J. Haynes, April 4th, 1962. It says, and I just read it because it's a little fuzzy in some places, a little over a week ago, the Negroes of Birmingham began a boycott against the downtown merchants. These merchants have always done business with the Negroes on a fair and equitable basis, with no discrimination whatever being shown in their dealings, and always applying the same rules of service and credit. These merchants are innocent of any wrongdoing and are being unjustly penalized. The city of Birmingham, in cutting off its contributions to the surplus food program, is demonstrating to the Negro community who their true friends and benefactors are. If the Negroes are going to heed the irresponsible and militant advice of the NAACP and core leaders, then I say let these leaders feed them. For in excess of 90% of the recipients of the free food handouts are Negroes. What stands out for you from this statement and memo by the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama at this time, 1962? What stands out for you from this statement? And, or, do you see any connections between this statement and our time today? If you do, type it in the box. I'm coming to the chat box in a moment. Again, just what jumps off the page? This statement startled me and stopped me in my tracks. And I'm just curious by what you might see in the statement and any connections you might see between then and now. I'm coming to the box. Let's see what you got. Then and now. Where can I? Oh, there it is. All right. All right. Danny Russell says benefactors. Tom, thank you, Danny. Tom says food as a weapon. Fair and equal with no discrimination. Davy? Correct me, write it phonetically. With a name like Heber, I can't mess up nobody's name. Help me. Grace says 90% are Negroes, so you feed them. Sarah says unjustly penalized. Tori says the percentage, 90%. Davy, great, thank you. S. Zimmerman says merchants unjustly penalized. Kathy said the merchants are innocent of wrongdoing. Militant advice. I caught that too, Laura. Militant advice, Laura says. I was just astonished. And y'all, I'm going to keep the chat box open. Y'all keep going. I was just astonished. Have y'all heard of this term gaslighting? Have you heard the term gaslighting? I've been by some of my young mentors rather, have taught me about gaslighting. If I'm remembering right, gaslighting is a way to discredit and undermine the opinion, perspective, and experience of someone else, to make them feel like they're just thinking so wrong about what they're saying their experience is. And if I'm remembering right, and if that is correct, then somebody tell me if I'm on it and build on that. I'm still learning about this term and this understanding of gaslighting. But if I've got it right or close to right, that first paragraph gives me all kind of gaslighting vibes. Here is the mayor of Birmingham. Thank you, Austin Monet. Austin Monet says that. That's one of my mentors, Austin Monet. She said that's right. Thank you, teacher. Here's the mayor of Birmingham in his position of power and privilege, responding to what Black people are saying their experience is. And in the face of that, the mayor saying, there is no discrimination going on. These business owners have always been fair and equitable, discrediting the experience. Elizabeth, thank you, Elizabeth. Convincing someone that what they have experienced with their own eyes and ears isn't true. All right, y'all helping me. Thank you. Help me. So what that first paragraph is, White supremacy. Thank you very kindly. Just going to say it straight like that. What this first paragraph does is discredit and undermine the experience of Black people in Birmingham. And then the second paragraph, y'all, and I think it's Tom. I think, Tom, you're the one who said it. Food as a weapon. If 90% of the African-American community at that time was recipients of the surplus food program, can you imagine what is the meaning and the intent behind cutting off funds and support for that kind of program? Some people might see that as an act of war to cut off a food supply. Food as a way to control people. Is it, can you spell your name phonetically? I want to make sure. E-L-A-N. I want to say it right. But that is a way to cut off the support. And this is one of those things, family, that has really helped me to see the politics of food. The politics of food. All right, I'm gonna push forward because like a lawnmower, Elon. Okay, Elon. Thank you, Elon. That the politics of food, and that's what I'm gonna be talking about throughout the rest of this presentation. I'm not gonna spend as much time on the future slides as I did with this one, but just to get you a sense, this is what I'm gonna be talking about this is what I'm gonna be exploring as I look into the history. All right, let's see. Sorry, here I come. So the thinking around land and food and the political nature of it is an old one. Frantz Fanon, the philosopher and writer, said for colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land. The land which will bring them bread and above all dignity. When I think about the politics of land and food, people like Malcolm X, who said revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. It's the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. A revolutionary wants land so he, let me add, or she, or they can set up his, her, their own nation, an independent nation. That's in his Message to the Grassroots message from 1963. And then when I dig into some of the histories around specific Black religious communities that saw the empowering and political nature of food and land, surprisingly so, Father and Mother Divine and the Peace Mission movement come to mind. Now, I gotta admit, I came to really know more about Mother Divine, Father Divine, and the Peace Mission movement much later on in my own personal journeys and studies. And the thing that I heard about Father Divine in particular, when I was first introduced to him, the main thing people were talking about was Father Divine said that he was God. Father Divine said he was God. I need you to imagine for a minute. I wish he was in the same room right now, because I need you to imagine for a minute this Black man in the early 1900s walking around telling folk, I'm God. I mean, the beautiful audacity of this brother saying, I am God. That was the first thing that I was told about Father Divine. But digging more into the Peace Mission movement, I began to see how many of the things that were attached to this ministry went so far beyond the claims of Father Divine saying he was God. Father Divine and the Peace Mission movement and Mother Divine and the Peace Mission movement, one of the things that really had their ministry take off, and this is like the 1930s, they started buying farms in upstate New York. I'm gonna go back one slide. Not only did they buy farms in upstate New York and grow their own food, but they bought like mansions and lived together. They bought hotels and made low rate lodging available for their members and for the broader community. They had restaurants where people could come and eat for pennies. I mean, what they were charging was so much lower than what you could get anywhere else, because Mother Divine, Father Divine, and the Peace Mission movement wanted to make a point about how God could supply their everyday needs and how by working together in cooperative fashion, they could do their part to bring about the beloved community. In fact, to go a little further, they were an intentionally interracial ministry in the early 1930s. I mean, throughout their the whole mission, but I'm pointing out the 1930s because I really want us to be thinking about this time period in the life of the country, in the story of the country, that they were an intentionally interracial ministry, lived together, ate together, grew food together, and through the ministry also engaged the political matters of the day. The peace mission movement was active with respect to lynching in these yet to be United States. The peace mission movement, I just read a statement a few moments ago. Father Divine was in support of reparations for Black people and said that reparations needed to be paid to every person of African descent and their descendants for the sin and crime of enslavement. They owned stores in Harlem. So what they would grow in upstate New York, they would truck down to their stores, their grocery stores and the like, into the city. And then there were other peace mission movement missions across the country, in California, in Denver, in Philadelphia, where they eventually moved their headquarters. They established a hotel there. I believe it's called the Lorraine Hotel. They had a hotel there. And then, later on, the ministry began to decline, in part because it didn't, the official teaching of the peace mission movement around like having children and even being physically intimate, like they was like, nah, we're not doing all that. And if you don't want children around your ministry, eventually your ministry is going to go the way that you go. And so the ministry weakened over the years. But what I really want to place spotlight upon was the fact that during the Great Depression and around the time of the last pandemic, this was a ministry that found innovative approaches to engaging their community by growing food together, living together, starting co-ops together, and really embracing a different kind of theology and practice of ministry that challenged the traditions of their day. I pray that that puts some seeds down in the soil of all of our minds for this time as well. But not only did Mother Divine, Father Divine, and the Peace Mission Movement engage in growing food and living together and really focusing on food and food sovereignty, but Marcus Garvey. Now listen, y'all, when you think about Marcus Garvey, some of the things, and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, some of the things that immediately come to mind is what? For those of you who know about Marcus Garvey, heard Marcus Garvey being talked about, the UNIA being talked about, what's the first thing that tends to come to people's minds? What can tend to come to your mind when you think about Marcus Garvey and the UNIA? My dean says revolution. Absolutely. Think about revolution. We think about Marcus Garvey, think about revolution. Arthur Monet, my mentor and teacher, says Black Star Line. Think about Black Star Line. One of the things, Dean Bridgman just said it. One of the things that first came to my mind, back to Africa. Marcus Garvey is about back to Africa. And that kind of introduction for me, it made my lens so rigid and narrow with respect to Marcus Garvey that I was missing out on other aspects of what the Universal Negro Improvement Association was all about. Some might ask, why do you have this Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist as a part of a Black religious presentation? One, and I'm tempted to go grab this book behind my shoulder. I'm not going to do it. But one, Marcus Garvey was very intentional about establishing the UNIA in such a way that it was akin to a Black church. They had their own religious leader, their own kind of pope. They had their own pope. They had their own official hymn of the UNIA. And Austin Monet may be able to tell you that we sang the Universal Negro Improvement Association hymn for like a whole month at my church at Baltimore, the church I serve in Baltimore, Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. Once I found that hymn and I learned that tune, we sang the hymn for the whole month. It wasn't Blessed Assurance or Amazing Grace, but we sang that hymn all month. But the point is, okay, fine, I'm gonna sing this little piece. It go like this. Advance, advance to victory. Let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe of the mighty. Something. That's good like that. Look, listen, when I tell you the black folk in my little church singing about advance to victory and let Africa be free every single Sunday, you can imagine the faces on the church mothers as their pastor was belting out freedom for Africa on Sunday morning, every Sunday morning, all month long. But, I tend to take some, I kind of take those kind of risks and say, you know what, it speaks to my heart. Let's just try it. And if I lose my job, I lose my job, but whatever. But the UNIA, they had worship services. They had a hymn. They intentionally made their gatherings on Sunday afternoon, so as not to interfere with Sunday morning church services. He had a whole long list of pastors that were involved in the UNIA meetings, led meetings. They had chaplains for every chapter. So it was a very religious organization. In fact, Marcus Garvey, if you look at his book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, he wrote sermons for Easter and Christmas. He wrote, his devotional. And you know what? Listen, as much as we turn to the devotionals of people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and so many others, okay, praise God, thank you, Lord. Let us not overlook the devotionals of people like Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey has a book full of sermons and devotionals. W.E.B. Du Bois has a book full of prayers. I know later in life, he transitioned to a point where he self-identified as being agnostic. But earlier in his life, he was very religious. He grew up in church. He wrote a whole book. Well, he wrote a whole stack of prayers. And one of his understudies came along and compiled those prayers into a book. And you can read, for instance, the prayers of W.E.B. Du Bois. And so this is a religious organization, at least if you let Marcus Garvey and the leadership of the UNIA tell it. But they're in the presentation as well because they also saw the relationship between their political understanding, their spiritual understanding, and food and land. And so I won't zoom in on it because it's a little bit fuzzy when I zoom in. But look on the right side of your screen. You see that advertisement where it says patronize your own industries. If you go down, you can see businesses owned, operated by the UNIA, steam laundry, tailoring and dressmaking, a publishing and printing house. Go down one more. The UNIA had grocery stores, and there are 3 of them listed here in this advertisement in their newspaper. And so they saw the connection between food and freedom as well. Food and freedom. There is a connection here as well. Let me keep moving forward. They also had a farm in Oregonia. Now, I think Oregonia in Ohio doesn't exist anymore. The last time I was able to come home to Ohio, I tried to find it because I was going to do an excursion to Oregonia, but I think it's not an official town anymore. But in the 1940s, the UNIA had a farm in Oregonia, Ohio, and that farm was established under the successor of Marcus Garvey, James Stewart, who became president of the UNIA in the 40s before relocating himself to Liberia with his family. Then we got to talk about Reverend Vernon Johns, who was a farmer, pastor, seminary president. He brilliant. I mean, everything I've read said this man had a brilliant mind, and he served many congregations, many times because he couldn't stay in a church long. He had a temper. He had deep convictions, and them good old Baptist deacons was not having Reverend Vernon Johns for too long. He was a seminary president as well. And the same thing with the seminaries. They was like, you know what? This man is brilliant, but I can't stand him. So he moved around a lot. But he also, in addition to moving around a lot, everywhere he went, he was talking about a different way to think about ministry. And because he was a farmer and because he grew up on the land, Look. Thank you, Jen. Jen said, he said what he wanted to say and challenge people by calling things and people out. Absolutely. Some years ago, they did a dramatic presentation of his life, the Vernon Johns story. You should be able to find it. In fact, it might be free on YouTube. Check that out when you get an opportunity. But Reverend Vernon Johns also was really big into food and farming. He started the Virginia Farm and City Enterprises in the 50s, at 100 acres of land in Prince Edward County, Virginia. And he had this dream of connecting farmers, Black churches, and Black restaurants. He wanted this triangle to come together to help buttress and support and embolden the aims of the Black community. And I just want to thank God as well for Dr. Beulah there at MTSO for just blessing me so much, surprising my whole life and helping to show me and teach me even more about Reverend Vernon Johns, and particularly pointing me in the direction of this book, Human Possibilities, a collection of his writings that were put together after he passed. And then he has an essay in this book called A Negro Agrarian Culture, where he outlines this dream that he has of urban and rural Negroes working together, controlling the production of their elemental necessities on the farm and becoming merchants of those in the city. It is apparent also, John says, that several new avenues to employment would be opened by such an enterprise. Check that out. So this idea of urban and rural, my teacher has to, all right, teacher, Dr. Austin Monet, God bless you. Thank you for popping in. I know you have an appointment. God bless you. But Dr. Johns had this idea of urban and rural African-American communities working in collaboration. And he was writing this and sharing this at a time when the first wave of the Great Migration was happening. And so he was saying, listen, well, since we got some Black folk leaving the South and heading north and west, and we got others staying here, how do we create supply lines and connection between y'all in the city and us down here in the country so that we might support the community on both ends? Yes, thank you, Dr. Beulah, for pointing us in this direction. This is a hard to find book, but if you can at least get this chapter, it's a very insightful chapter that allows us to see into the mind of Dr. Johns with respect to how to make connections. And then I lift up the Nation of Islam as well, because if you're talking about food and faith in the 20th century, the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad are a part of that story. In the 1960s, Elijah Muhammad led the Nation of Islam in buying 5,000 acres of land in Georgia, and he was known to say the farm is the engine of our national life. In their newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, they often wrote about the farm and the importance of it, how it is the foundation for Black liberation and freedom, and how a people who cannot feed themselves cannot free themselves. So if we want to be free, we got to start feeding ourselves. Here in this 1974 article in their paper, Muhammad Speaks, he writes about the 2 million pounds of fresh fish that they brought into the city, into Chicago, and then they got pictures of delivering that fish around the community. I love images like this, family, because it shows me that in the Nation of Islam, and we can also add it to the other religious communities as well, they were trying to think like a system. They were looking at the different points of a food system and saying, in what ways can our ministry, in what ways can our group or organization intersect with the food system? And this spread right here from their newspaper shows you distribution, transportation, storage, and all in the middle of that is their understanding. Look at that in the middle on the right side of the page. God's messengers, fishers of men. They did not have a separate spiritual insight into food that disconnected from their political and economic realities that they were facing. They had an analysis and a summary that came together. It was not bifurcated in separate spaces and places. They also owned the supermarket where they sold a lot of what they grew as well. Their ministry continues to this day. It's down there still in Georgia. They don't have as much land as they used to have in the 70s, but they still have, I think, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 acres of land that they still have to this day. And it came into good use this year. Even in this pandemic year, they were able to send beans and rice and other things to many of their members and many of their chapters across the country. I gotta lift up Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I'm watching the time, Jen, so I'm gonna keep moving. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, though, listen, it is such a sin and a shame that Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer's life is boiled down to 9 words. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was far more than a soundbite. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was one who was an organizer and an activist par excellence. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was active, yes, when it came to the voting rights struggle, yes, advocating voting and protections for voting for Black people in the South. But Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer also, particularly beginning in the late 60s, early 70s, was almost exclusively talking about land, food, and food sovereignty, at least according to Jessica Gordon Nimhart in her book, Collective Courage, where she writes about cooperative and economic thought in the Black community. She says by the early 70s, Fannie Lou Hamer was primarily talking about land, food, and food sovereignty. Check out this quote, and I'm gonna read it out loud just because I love the way it sounds. Thank you, Jen. Food is used as a political weapon. But if you have a pig in your backyard and some vegetables in your garden, you can feed yourself and your family and nobody can push you around. Again, do you see the connections that are being made by these Black folk from the 20th century between land and food and freedom and faith? You see how the connections all dance together. And for her, for Mrs. Hamer, she understood, similar to what some of you all said in the beginning, that food could be used as a weapon. And so stewarding collectively land, growing food together, and feeding yourselves is just as much a part of our physical need as it is a part of our socio-political and spiritual yearnings and theoretical framework as well. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer led the effort around establishing Freedom Farm Co-op in the late 60s. Black-controlled land-based institution in Sunflower County, Mississippi. They had more than 600 acres of land that included a pig bank. They took Heifer International's model and brought it domestic. I just assumed people knew about Heifer International, but it's a group that allows for people to put financial resources behind supporting others in other parts of the world outside the United States with getting like a goat or a cow or sheep, knowing that those animals could help to increase the quality of life for people in other parts of the world. Mrs. Hamer saw that model, and along with Dr. Dorothy Height, they bought a bunch of pigs. They trained people how to work with those pigs and use those pigs to support themselves and their families. And they had the families to agree to give 2 piglets back to the pig bank for the next family to get a pig as well. So this cooperative effort was there as well. Finally, and I'll pick up the pace here a little bit. Reverend Albert Clegg from the Shrine of the Black Madonna in the early 70s was also talking about connecting African Americans in the North and the South to create their own supply chains and to lift up one another. He says, and I jump into a piece of this quote, "We will be related through one cooperative economic movement which will enable us to distribute goods raised in the rural counties of the South on Black farms in northern urban centers, where Black people are now dependent on white merchants." Again, another example of how in the 20th century, the faith and political, civil rights, and spiritual leaders of that day and the communities that they were a part of saw connection between faith, food, and freedom. They also had, Reverend Clegg also had their own publication, and this is just one of my favorites from his publication, because Dr. King has given Reverend Clegg a side eye. And y'all, if I was to exegete the photo, I could see why the side eye might have been appropriate, because there's some ideological tension between these 2 men that you see on this screen in particular, as well as other nuances between their approaches for empowering the Black community. Reverend Albert Clegg led his congregation around this vision of stewarding land together and creating a mega farm for for the Black community in the United States. That's what he called it, a mega farm. They ended up buying more than 3,000 acres of land in Western South Carolina. And what is phenomenal to me about this story is that Reverend Clegg was not around in the physical to see the manifestation of what he put forward as a vision for his church. He talked about the importance of it. He talked about, if you want to be free, we got to feed ourselves. But he wasn't around in the physical for the manifestation of it. But the church held fast to the vision nevertheless. And they ended up selling all kinds of chicken dinners and fish dinners and putting their monies together. And they paid cash for the first few thousand acres of this land in Western South Carolina. And they just paid off the note fully. I believe last year they completely paid off the note on the other 1,000 acres that they did finance. It's a phenomenal story. And the thinking is that this Black church is the largest landowner in the country. I've got to continue to verify and look at that, but that's the thinking, that with 3,750 acres in Western South Carolina alone, this is the largest farming and land owning Black church in the country. I'll quickly tie this to food activists on a larger scale. This organization called La Via Campesina have a definition of food sovereignty, which is what we've been talking about pretty much for our time together so far, that food sovereignty is the right of peoples, to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. It puts those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies rather than the demands of markets and corporations. So you see how there's a power analysis in this understanding of food sovereignty. I also love the analysis that Karen Washington gives. She's a co-founder of Black Urban Growers. She pushes back on the term food desert. She pushes back on that term. Karen Washington says, I'd rather say, instead of food desert, food apartheid, because food apartheid looks at the whole food system, along with race and geography, faith and economics. You say food apartheid, and you get to the root cause of some of the problems around the food system. I was really educated, and I'm thankful to Karen Washington for really pushing me around the term food desert and closer to food apartheid. What I love about her definition and phrase and term is that it points to the intentionality. So the food dynamics that we experience. Kathy said it in the introduction. Why does this side of the street have a grocery store and that side of the street does not have a grocery store? And sometimes if you just stay with food desert mentality, you just think, oh, wow, happenstance. Oh my goodness, that is so interesting. I never thought why that is, right? But Karen Washington says, wait a minute here now. This is intention. When you look at why this community has, what y'all got up there, Kroger's, Whole Foods, what y'all got, Publix. This side of the community has multiple places to go and get nutrient-rich food. And this side has corner stores, or they got to take 2 or 3 buses to get to where they need to be. That ain't no happenstance, y'all. That ain't no coincidence. We do a little, okay, Kroger's, Giant, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, all right, we're talking the same thing, right? It's not a coincidence. If you go back to the 1930s, ooh, I ain't got time, but I wish I had time. I feel like preaching right now. In the 1930s, as a part of the New Deal that was supposed to engage the issues around poverty that came out of the Great Depression and the like, and it was going on during the Great Depression, this New Deal, as a part of that period, there was something called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The Homeowners Loan Corporation were the ones who put together the redlining maps for the entire country. Redlining came out of the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a quasi-governmental agency that really pointed to where investment, development, and good housing would go. And then the other places where, thank you, Jen, the other places where you needed to stay away from them because, and this is the literal terminology, at least that they use here in Baltimore, there's a coming Negro invasion in this part of the city or the municipality. And those were the red lines. Those same places, and I invite you, family, wherever you're watching from, grab the redlining map from the 30s and overlay it with the food apartheid reality in your city today, what you may see is that there is a connection between what the government, corporations, and wealthy stakeholders in communities, how they work together to establish where the investment would go, how their wealth would be shielded from the Negro invasion. This was intentional. It was systemic. It was intentional. It was policy. It was purposeful, and it is sinful. And so what Karen Washington does is invite us into an understanding around this, but also I hope with that little piece around food apartheid and food sovereignty, I also hope we can better appreciate Fannie Lou Hamer and what she was working, she and her community, what they were working up against, what they were pushing back against, what Vernon Johns was pushing back against, what Albert Clegg, what Mother Divine was pushing back against. It was a system, the intentional oppression of Black people in this country, and food and land was the weapon of choice in so many aspects of that reality. Let me keep going because I feel my help coming on. Let me keep pushing. Finally, I'll say on this, I invite you, how do these chapters from history affirm or challenge your experience regarding food ministry, sustainable agriculture, or the environmental movement? What questions, if any, came to mind as you listen to this history today? I ask those questions, y'all, because it is so common for us to get take a whole journey in the environmental movement, sustainable agriculture, land. We can take a whole journey in those directions without ever lifting up a Black woman who was analyzing, writing about, making spiritual insight and analysis of, like, you can do all that work and never even talk about one Black woman, one Black man, one Black church who was just as much a part of that legacy and history, if not more so, than many of the usual names that we continually raise up over and over again. You need to read, for example, Bell Hook's work, Earthbound essay. She has an essay called Earthbound. That needs to be a part of any of our land, food, or environmental places of study, places of commitment and activism. Go read that. Who's saying there was a singer? Here's my little quiz. There was a singer, good one too, who sang about what was going on in the ecological realm, sang about the oceans, sang about what's going on with the animals, war in the world. Who's the singer? Pop quiz, the singer and the song, singing about ecology and with a smooth crooning R&B-ish spirit. I'm gonna leave that to y'all as I keep on moving because Jim looking at me. All right, but then I'll come back to that. If you don't get it, I'll come back to that at the end. I want to lift up and share now with that history in mind. Allow me to quickly then, I won't have to spend much time here because this history has already set the stage. Laura says, how I wish I had learned this when I was in school. Laura, me too. I found myself wishing that my 15-year-old who was in a US history class at this moment were learning this. Laura, we can set something up because the reality is our children learning, hearing, and engaging these histories are just as important in their understanding as anything they might be getting in school right now, as my children are in virtual learning right around the hallway as well. This is so important. Grace said, Heber, you once told me that we white folks had work to do. Amen. In these divided days, what is the first thing you would recommend the pastor of a white racist churches do? Leave? Oh, Grace. Grace, you know what? That's a good question. It's a provocative question. And I know that amongst and within the circles of white clergy persons, that y'all will put y'all brains together and figure out a way forward. I just offer up that this information be helpful in your deliberations and in your time of meditation around a way forward. And I'll offer up some other texts as well. Last year, we lifted up and studied together and really worked. I did a series last year. I preached a series called Whiteness Cannot Be Saved. Whiteness Cannot Be Saved. And so in that series, I lifted up a book. Thank you, Jen. I lifted up this book that really spoke to the complicity of the church with respect to giving credence and credibility to white as this social category where privilege is baked in and power is baked in. I'll try to grab that book before I close. Jen is helping me stay on track here. I'll try to grab that book off the shelf real quick, but it was a very helpful book as well to see how complicit white Christianity has been in setting up these dynamics where oppression, exploitation, domination, patriarchy, go on down the line, continue in many ways unabated. Mm-hmm. And there are other texts as well. Tim, is that a text as well called White Too Long? We're going to resource. Let's share resources with each other in the box as well as I'm going through. But let me share what God has inspired through and in our ministry as a result, in part, of the history I just shared. And this is more in line about the Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, where I'm blessed to serve as pastor, and the Black Church Food Security Network. So Black Church Food Security Network is about health, wealth, and power. We're about health, wealth, and power. We're not a food charity organization. We're not a food charity organization. We are a self-help organization more than a charity organization. We're an organization that embraces asset-based community development. We're an organization that celebrates and uplifts and embraces theology of abundance with respect to our community. And hopefully you see some of that in the few minutes that I'm gonna share this. Pleasant Hope Baptist Church is where I pastor. It was established in the 1930s, around the same time that so much of the history I just shared was going on. This church was born in Baltimore. There's lots of college students. Our average worship attendance, well, it was 120, but now that we're online, I don't know what's going on, y'all. Y'all, much prayer. I don't know who watching. Much prayer. I pray some people are blessed, but our metrics with membership are being challenged in this historic year. Some years ago, I noticed a pattern amongst those I was serving, that they were going in and out of the hospital over and over again with diet-related issues. And this is a picture of the healthy food market that's across the street from our church. My intention was to go here and set up a partnership, because I said, I have people in our congregation who are on this merry-go-round of health challenges that are connected to their not having access and agency with their food environment. They don't have nutrient-rich food. Let me go across the street to this healthy food store and see what we can do. I go over there, I walk to the store, I see the prices on their produce, and I say, no, indeed, no, indeed. Ain't nowhere in the world we can establish a partnership if these are the kinds of numbers that we're dealing with. And so I left out of there frustrated because of that experience. Just to show you what fed my frustration, the top left corner is that market where the star is. The bottom right star is Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. I literally walked across the main road there, York Road, at that intersection, and saw what we needed, but was not able and didn't see a way forward in making a connection. Now, somebody might say, well, why didn't you just talk to the manager? I'm sure they would have came up with some type of program to assist and to support if that was the issue. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. But the last thing I wanted to do was to lead the congregation that I serve in the direction of a food charity program where the food might have been free, but it would have costed us our dignity. I didn't want to lead Pleasant Hope down that path. I don't want to do it. We're not going to grovel. We're not going to beg for something that we believe is a part of our right. If we are in the image of God, we're not going to be begging other folk to bring food into our community. I just could not do it. I stomped up out of there, believing that we were going to figure something else out. But I was frustrated. I get back near the front door of our church, and there's an epiphany right there in that moment, because near the front door of our church there's a piece of yard that I'd walked past hundreds of times. But on that day, with divine discontent bubbling up in my spirit, I saw something different. This is the yard that I've seen hundreds of times. But that day, God showed me a vision of us taking this land and growing what we needed for ourselves. No, it's not acres upon acres, but we're going to roll up our sleeves and use what we have. That's what I told the church. We came together, rallied together in support and partnership. I thank God for the members of our church who grew up in the South and on farms. We worked together and transformed that into this 1,500 square feet. This is our garden. Broccoli, kale, herbs, peppers. Now we got fruit trees. I got to update this picture. We got peaches, we got pears, we have a compost. It's a beautiful, beautiful garden that produces somewhere around 1,100 or 1,200 pounds of produce a year. And we're grateful for this. I'm grateful for the members of our church who, after worship on Sundays, would come together and get some of the things that we grew out of the garden. We started sharing recipes and stories of the produce that we were growing to show that we have a cultural connection to what it is that we were growing. Members of our church started posting on Facebook about what they were growing and making and preparing in the garden. And that's when I knew things were really heating up. I'm grateful as well for what happened just last month, y'all. 1 month ago exactly, to the time of this recording and conversation, we were so blessed. A cannabis company reached out and said, we heard about y'all, we want to help. How can we help? We said, you can help us build a greenhouse. And that's what we did together. Somebody stopped. I did say cannabis. I said cannabis, praise the Lord. And I'm going to keep on saying cannabis as the laws are changing. And now people are making all this buku money. I'm going to keep on talking about cannabis, praise the Lord. Amen. In the name of Jesus. But yes, Pleasant Hope partnering with the Black Church Food Security Network and a cannabis company. And we built this greenhouse right here on the grounds. And so what started as a 1,500 square foot garden now includes a greenhouse as well. And I'm looking forward to the next step of adding cold storage to our land and space too, so that we began to think about the various parts of a food system and how our ministry can be creative with respect to it. My chat box is not open, but I know Jen, I hear you, Jen. I feel you in my spirit, Jen. This is the woman that really was the bedrock behind why our garden took off. Mama Maxine Nicholas. She became an ancestor in 2017. She became an ancestor. She passed from this life to the next life, and she remains a patron saint of our garden. But she grew up on a farm in North Carolina with a bunch of brothers and sisters. And when her pastor, her 27-year-old pastor, 28-year-old pastor said, let's start a garden, she rightly said, that boy don't know what he talking about with no garden. Let me go help him. And Mother Maxine came down from the sanctuary choir, put up her tools and her garden gloves and went to work on that land with the rest of the AARP club. They got together and worked a miracle on our land. The more I saw what was going on there, the more I said we could really do something to systematize this throughout our community of churches that we're in relationship with. I started thinking about an alternative food system led by Black folk. Black folk having their own food system, growing their own food, processing, all the things we saw from history informed my imaginings around what we could do through Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. In 2015, we launched the Black Church Food Security Network. These are three of the main programs and pillar programs of our organization at this time. I'm gonna quickly go through them. One is Operation Higher Ground. We work with churches to establish gardens on Black church-owned land. Why? Land is important. And two, we focus on Black church-owned land because gentrification is like a real thing in our community. And Black church-owned land has added degrees of buffers, in my experience, from that kind of activity. And so we look at Black church-owned land, historical, community-owned land. I call it sometimes the original land trust of the Black community is Black church-owned land. We do ceremony on the land. We sing, we testify, we break ground together, and we establish these gardens together at various churches and then have the churches work together. This was a church that we helped, the Black Church Food Security Network helped to put money together to build this tunnel. Matter of fact, when I think about MTSO and the beautiful things y'all are doing at MTSO, in my opinion, the leading theological school with respect to farming and agriculture in the country, in my opinion. No shade to nobody else, in my opinion. But that vision also is connected to this, what we were able to do at a church in East Baltimore. And as you can tell by all the teeth out my mouth at the time, I was super excited about that. Every green circle on this map of Baltimore City is a Black Church Food Security Network church. We're helping them to grow their food, and we're working together to make it happen in a systemic fashion. So if one church got a whole lot of land, another church got a whole lot of nutritionists, another church has expertise with building and carpentry, we love network weaving those kinds of connections together. Our soil to sanctuary market is basically a miniature farmers market inside the church when the congregation gathers. We use our church marquee to promote our soil to sanctuary market. We have the young people of our church and community. I have on the same shirt, Lord have mercy. Look at that. I got to say, but this, I didn't preach, I preached on that one in the picture, so I was a little bit sweaty, but praise the Lord, amen. But we have the young people in our congregation to set up vending tables at the farmers market. We want to support them in entrepreneurship and business early on in life. And Naima is a child chef champion that teaches us how to make meals and vegetarian food. And it's a wonderful thing to bear witness to. And we're grateful for utilizing our church kitchen as a learning laboratory, as an incubator space. In this picture, the sisters from the local mosque came together with the church mothers, and we did a joint workshop around the health benefits of navy beans and how they could improve and increase our trajectories with respect to health. Finally, the Black Church Supported Agriculture Program, BCSA, was our pivot. It's our pandemic pivot. Congregations aren't gathering in person. So what we decided to do was, fine, we're going to help churches buy in bulk from Black farmers, and then our organization will help truck that produce from the farm to the church. Hence, Black Church Supported Agriculture. A whole lot of churches are doing food distribution right now, and we're grateful for that. But you need to ask the question, where is the food coming from? Lord have mercy, that's a whole presentation right there. Where is the food coming from? I can bet you this, most of the food that's in the food stream for food outreach ministry today is not coming from small Black farmers. And so we want to add some of that justice with that charity. Let's pay Black farmers, get their produce and food, and help move that into our communities to be a blessing to those all around us. So we're the ones, and this is our Deputy Director, Siobhan. We rent rider trucks. We drive back and forth, up and down 95. This is my cousin, Junebug. This is my real cousin, Junebug. He's a truck driver. He's come alongside to help us pick up the produce and bring it back and forth. This is us at 2:43 a.m. in the morning, unloading the truck at the church, getting it ready to take it to our partners. This picture is pixelated, but that's my pickup truck and us driving to Virginia to pick up more items from farmers. And this is Austin Monet McClendon. She came back home and she jumped right into the flow of our outreach and helped us to deliver all these greens to Kingdom Fellowship AME Church here in Montgomery County, Maryland. So that's our BCSA program. And here are more resources out, Freedom Farmers. I can't speak enough about Dr. Monica White, the brilliance that she has with respect to these kinds of histories. Check her out. Dr. Ashante Reese, Black Food Geographies. My sister, Leah Pennyman, Farming While Black. And I love this book, Jennifer Ayers' book, Good Food, Grounded, Practical Theology, and other resources as well. I'll stop there. I know time is definitely on us. And so I'd love to engage you around Q&A time. Is that right, Jen? Q&A. And for the rest of the family who's coming back on the screen, y'all can come on back on. Reactions, reflections, questions, clarifications. I know that was a lot, y'all, but it's a recording. You can go back and get more later. But I pray that it planted some seeds around our thinking on land and faith and food and freedom. Thank y'all so very much.
Get the clock, Heber, whenever you speak. We are ready for more. So we'll have time to hear you more shortly. Thank you for bringing us the history, where we are in the current moment with you, inspiring us in our own places. So we'll continue to ask you to put questions or comments in the chat, but questions that you'd like us to get to in the question and answer time in the Q&A box. And we're going to talk a little bit about MTSO in this work for briefly and then get to that conversation. So as many of you know, MTSO has commitments to sustainable justice in many aspects, all aspects, and a vision for training leaders for a generative world in this work. In 2013, we started a campus farm to use our land more responsibly, feeding our campus and adding to the local food supply. Many initiatives have followed, both in our curriculum and also with our community, including the Community Food and Wellness Initiative. This is a grant-funded program that has allowed us to support various partnerships, bring groups to campus for learning, and support many individuals, graduates, and students as both associates and interns who are engaged in the work of food justice in many Central Ohio neighborhoods, faith communities, urban farms, and more. One of these associates has been Jennifer Fowler, a graduate of MTSO and a worker for justice. She will speak first about her entrance into the work, followed by our faculty member, Dr. Tim Van Meter, who is an MTSO professor and also our coordinator for ecological initiatives. He's provided leadership to curriculum, new scholarship, and also new partnerships in this work, so we're happy that he can also share today. So Jen, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much, Heber, for all of the teaching and information that you have shared with us. I feel like I'm just like, I want more. But in regards to my story, we are all introduced to this work in different ways. And for me, it started with a required course of cross-cultural trip. And I went to South Africa in January of 2018. It was the first time I had ever left the country. I had never gotten a passport before. So I didn't exactly know what I was getting myself into, but I went in with an open mind and was extremely excited for what was going to happen. And as we landed in South Africa, I was overcome with emotions and just feelings landing in Africa as an African-American woman. And while I was basking in that excitement and that joy and those feelings, there was a ding from the overhead speakers that came on, and our stewardess came on to give us some instructions. And I was expecting for her to tell us that we are going to get off the plane in a certain way, but that's not what she said. She said, most of you may not know, but South Africa is quickly approaching day 0, and we are running out of water. And so while you have come to visit, to tour, to experience our country, please know that our country is in the middle of a water crisis, and you can help by ensuring that you don't waste our water. And I was real confused because, like, how do you run out of water? Like, what does that mean? And so I had all of these questions in regards to what that looks like and what that meant. And I was grateful that the stewardess gave us suggestions on ways that we can preserve water. So be cautious of using water in bathrooms, and use hand sanitizer when you could. Choose to take baths instead of showers, because we tend to waste more water in showers and things like that. And so as we got off the plane, I'm excited about being in Africa, but I have all of these questions about what it means to be out of water. Water is something that is a basic human need that I believe that everyone should have access to. So what does it mean to run out of it? And so I began to have all of these questions, but as we traveled throughout the country for 2.5 weeks, I noticed that some areas of the country that were more financially fluent, if you will, had sprinklers going off on green grass, and they were wasting water. But in other areas of the country, there was this pressure to save water because they were running out. People stocking up on bottles of water in their homes. And there just seemed to be a disparity between who could use water whenever they wanted to and who needed to save it to ensure that they had enough past this projected day zero. And I began to have questions around, what is that disparity? Why does it exist? What is really happening here in this place? And I wrestled with that the entire time that I was in Africa. And I came back and I took a class on ecological justice and global awareness. And I really wanted to ask the questions of water. And I knew that Flint had happened in the United States, and I knew that day zero was approaching in Africa, but I wanted to unpack, like, what is this really, like, is this happening in other places? Because I naively thought that Flint was only happening in Flint. What I didn't realize that in a town of Marlin, Texas, they had just spent billions of dollars replacing the water supply system, but yet sent out a notice to all of the residents who are getting $300 water bills that the water was not safe to drink and it was coming out brown, and that they still had to pay their water bills. And those that chose to not pay their water bills and just disconnect their water and buy their own water still had a bill of $125 a month because they had to cover the upgrades that were done to get the unclean water that they were being charged for. There was a governor who said 150,000 people without clean water is not really a national emergency or a statewide emergency. And so I began to wrestle with, what is really happening here? And all of that wrestling came together for me as I was sitting in a church service at New Salem Missionary Baptist Church in the Linden community here in Columbus. And we got the announcement that the Kroger's in that community was closing. And for me, that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I didn't understand. So for me, the question became, why are Black and brown people or lower income people disproportionately affected by access to food and clean water? Like, what is going on here? This can't all be an accident. This is on purpose, and there must be something that we can all do about it. And so for me, I was grateful that I was connected to New Salem and I was connected to MTSO, because those two institutions and organizations have a belief that we need to be justice focused and we need to do things about what is going on in our world. And so New Salem, this prominent church in this community that predominantly is filled with lower income people and has a high proportion of minorities living in that area, now is in the center of a community where you have to travel miles to get to another grocery store, where there's no direct bus line to that grocery store, and that the Kroger's that closed still had a lease on the building of at least $100,000 a month that they were going to continue to pay while not selling groceries in that store. And so while all of the frustration of that geared up, New Salem chose to partner with other community members in the city, and they established the Linden Farmers Market. And so my heart became excited because it's like, yes, we're gonna provide food. I became overjoyed when I found out that MTSO, the place that I was going to get a master's of divinity, the place that I was going to figure out who God is in this world and in my life, was going to join in on that work and be a vendor at that farmer's market and provide food for people. And so the excitement was like, I was like, yes, 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 this is great. And they asked for volunteers, and I saw the email that came through that said that there were going to be volunteers that were coming to do this great work to ensure that the Linden community had access to food, had access to resources. And so transparently, I did not sign up to volunteer the first week. I went over to it, but I went over because I was nosy, not because I actually wanted to volunteer that particular day. But what happened when I got there was that there were hundreds of people from all over the community that were there to get vegetables, to get fruits, to get resources, to take cooking classes, to be able to take part of what was going on there. And while I hadn't planned on volunteering that day, I realized that it was my time to volunteer. And I'm excited that on that day, I put my purse in the chair, I tucked that chair in under the table, and I went to work, ensuring that people had access to the fresh vegetables that MTSO was selling, was able to connect them to other vendors that were in there so they could combine those foods and make amazing meals for themselves. The running joke at the table became, what do you want to make for dinner tonight? Oh, well, you need a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And if you go over to that vendor right there, they can give you this. And if you go over there, you can get that. And so week after week after week, Dr. Van Meter and I showed up on Sunday mornings to ensure that everything was set up and good to go. And so I'm excited that we got to spend 2 summers doing that. Unfortunately, COVID shut some things down and we had to make some alternative plans for food access this past summer. But I'm grateful that over the average attendance for each one of those Sundays was 350 people. I'm grateful that there were 32 vendors that came out week after week after week to ensure that people had access to the basic needs. I'm grateful that while there were 32 vendors, a third of those vendors were actually from the Linden community. So it just wasn't people coming out saying, I'm going to save Linden. It was intentionality in regards to including Linden in that work and providing things that Linden needed and wanted. I'm grateful that 69% of the vendors that were there were women or minority owned vendors, so that we are pouring into people and you're coming to a farmer's market that is filled with people that look like you. There's greatness in that. So it's not about coming in and saving a community. It's about empowering a community that they can have the resources and supports and the structure they need to sustain and support themselves. I'm also extremely grateful that through partnerships, they were able to give out over $3,000 worth of incentive coupons to the Linden community to come and then spend at the Linden Farmers Market. So it wasn't that we recognized that people didn't always have the funds to do and get the things that they needed. And so I'm grateful that MTSO and New Salem and the city of Columbus recognized all of these barriers and said, money is an issue, great. Here are coupons that you can use during this farmer's market. You have an EBT card, great. If you come here, we will double your EBT points so that you can get twice as amount of food if you're spending it on produce. We're going to offer this on Sundays. We're going to have kid-friendly activities that are going on so that you don't have to worry about where your kid is and if they're appropriately engaged while you're getting your produce. There's games, there's music, there's free food that's also being provided each and every Sunday, and it's right off of Main Street. And so if for some reason you didn't get the flyer on your door, as you're driving out of the community, you're going to drive past it and you can just stop and come. It's a place that's open for everyone, that's free for people to just come and be so that they can have the things that they need. And so it was a joy for me to engage in that work. But what the bigger joy for me is that I was connected to an institution, MTSO, where this was not the only thing that they did. Right? And so Dr. Van Meter can talk more about the work that MTSO is doing and has done, but that's just how I got involved in the work and what I know to be a success through this partnership.
Thank you, Jen. Like I'm supposed to follow you and Heber. That's crazy. Thank you so much. And what Jen didn't tell you, she walked up on that table and realized that Dr. Van Meter can't make change. And so she immediately put her purse down and said, I'll take this over. We'll be okay. You do public relations and I will make sure this stand is run correctly. She's a joy to work with. We have a great time. We're involved in a variety of ways, but how we do this is through partnerships. And so it's incredibly important for us to have partners like we have in the Linden community and hope to extend those, to have partners even earlier than that in Franklinton. One of our students, alums, was one of the key people in shifting the food security emphasis in Franklinton, a gentleman named Patrick Kaufman, who really started the work before he came to us, but then became a person who challenged us to rethink how we're engaged in this work, and was one of the voices, along with Kathy and other folks, that helped us to rethink how we use our land. And I think that that's where this conversation begins, is I agree with Reverend Dr. Heber Brown that it is a sin, and it is disobedience for folks who have significant resources in land to use that to grow a monocrop called grass. That particular, when there's hungry folks around you. So that particular lack of vision was something that students helped us to re-engage in a different way. I may have incited a little bit, but that's what we're supposed to do as professors, is incite and invite and hopefully get some changes going on. And so we have those early initiatives, and also through the work that Kathy does with the Food and Wellness Initiative through MTSO, that Jen's been involved with and other students have been involved with, including Patrick, who I mentioned, and Alex Clementson, who's also been part of that, and others. We've been able to extend our partnerships. And part of this too is just all of a sudden people hear you asking these questions. So you get calls out of the blue, like colleagues in Marion who knew of a pastor who had just been given land by a farmer who owned land across the street from him, about 1/4 of an acre. And this was the oldest African-American church in the town of Marion, Ohio. And just through friends connected us to say, what can we do? And then also connect them up with folks at the Ohio State INFACT program, connect them up with Heber, and get the questions happening. And they're in their 3rd growing season now. And Heber was very much involved early on in that. And this was a white farmer who saw this land across the street from a Black church and said, this land is going to waste. I don't want to build another rental house here. How can I change this? Came out, walked the land with myself and the pastor there and some other folks there, Pastor Sean and some other folks, and began to ask questions about how this can be used. Then came back with his tractor, took out trees, took out stumps, took out rocks, plowed the ground, laid down plastic, and then walked with the folks as they had their elders come out who had growing experience and plant that for the first time. And it's just continued to go on. They've had some setbacks and had a pretty heavy rain come through earlier this year in the planting season. The pastor called me or emailed me and said, what can we do? And I said, just call it the salad plot. Whatever went down there is your salad, and it will be a variety of greens and other things growing all together, and just call it salad and plant wherever the ground isn't there. But that kind of work is important to us. And this is shifting our vision in our curriculum. When we talk about justice, we talk about food, but we also talk about larger ecological issues. And folks in this particular webinar or this particular presentation are fully aware of, I'm sure, of the huge racist line of thinking throughout the ecological movement in North America. It has been a white-run, white exclusive vision of the world. Early founders like the Sierra Clubs come into grips with the words of their own early founder, John Muir, but it's just been that way. And it has been exclusionary, and through use of language, through use of resources, through use of vision, have excluded people who really would benefit most by taking their health and ecological vision most, being most careful with that. And so part of the core curriculum of MTSO is an anti-racist ecological vision of the world, an anti-racist engagement with food insecurity, food apartheid, an anti-racist vision for engaging climate change, that each of these questions aren't separate, that there are ways that the exploitation of the earth, to quote our dean, that it's no, or to paraphrase our dean, I can't quite quote her. I don't even know how to do that, but to paraphrase her, that possibly part of the reason we refer to Mother Earth is because we treat her as poorly as we treat many women of color in our lives. And I know that's a paraphrase and she says it more powerfully, but that's the truth. So for us to be anti-racist, is that we have to recognize from the beginning the inequities, and then for some of us, be race traders. Begin to move in a direction that allows a vision of the world where we shift our understanding of who has the economics for their own self-determination, who has the ability to grow food for their own sovereignty, and that work. And part of what's so beautiful about what Jen said, she described that market or some of the work. I've been in Heber's church. I visited on the day where there was a video crew. That's just kind of what I do, is I show up whenever there's somebody going to take my picture. And That was a good day, and y'all ain't heard him preach yet. He can really preach when he needs to. But part of what Jen and I witnessed when we were at the Linden Market was also the kingdom of God. The people walking in that space from a variety of visions of human existence, whether it be race, whether it be gender and sexuality, whether it be any number of forms of difference, gathering together, sometimes dancing, sometimes just listening to jazz, but just being together in kind of a common area of a functional market. And one of the places we have to do our theological work is to revision what our economics mean. I've been in conversation with other folks in this kind of movement who say, well, we just have to take capitalism as if it's the way of the world, and we have to go forward with that. But I think the theological task of the church and the theological task of education in a seminary is to reimagine the structures that allow all people to thrive. And right now we have oppressive systems. And so part of what we want to be about at MTSO is reimagining the systems for all people to thrive. So we're going to stay in conversation. In fact, we're going to begin again to rethink what does it mean to be involved in kind of our region, which is a more general Midwest, in partnership with Heber and with others too. Jen and I serve as the chair of the Ohio Interfaith Power and Light, and our director, Marcia Dinkins, has a really very similar vision, and to bring people together in conversation. So for those of y'all who are in the Midwest, it's an easy conversation for us to be part of, but we're also partnering with Life Around the Table and Eating Together Faithfully, and want to continue to grow that partnership together in a way that allows all of us to have a larger vision together. We've had events on our campus. I guess some of the things we could talk about was when we had Climate Reality Project and the Center for Earth Ethics, who did a 3-day conference on food, land, faith, and justice. And that was a remarkable few days for us. But we're having ongoing Theological Commons. We have our degrees. We now have the ability within our degrees for folks to kind of come into the classroom from wherever they are and ask these questions through Zoom or elsewhere. So we're doing a lot. You've heard a whole lot, and I think it's probably time for questions.
It is time for questions, so please keep adding them to the Q&A, and we're trying to pick up the ones that we see in the chat, but because we can't see you, make sure if you have something, just go ahead and add that in, and all panelists, if you see something, grab it, and we'll continue the conversation. Grace says you hope that people are going to be applying to MTSO so you can keep on keeping on. I just have to raise that one because come on, you know, we're ready for you. We're ready for those that you know. So let's lift that up.
Can I also say on that point real quick, Austin Monet McClendon is a member of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, the church I'm blessed to serve. And when I discerned that seminary was in her future, I brought her, Dean Bridgman allowed me to come and to share at an event on campus, and Austin Monet came with me. And she didn't know this, but we were conspiring together to give her an orientation to MTSO. So that by the time we got on the plane to come back to Baltimore, Austin Monet was already talking about coming to MTSO. So it's a beautiful story, and she's a brilliant thinker. Her brain is straight from glory in the way she analyzes. And why that matters, though, I raised that not just to talk about Austin Monet and not just to talk about MTSO. I raised that because given the kind of ministry that we feel inspired to embrace at Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, it was and is important that those in our church family connect with learning spaces that only nurture and continue to develop the seeds and cultivate it in places in ways that I couldn't even begin to think. And so just imagine what it does now when soon to be Dr. Austin Monet McClendon comes back to Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, the depth of the partnership only intensifies because of what she was able to experience because of a seminary and because of a dean that had that type of deep commitment around embodying this work, and equally rigorous engagement around the theological tasks that Tim lifted up as well. And so I see MTSO as a pipeline. It's like anybody Pleasant Hope, if you sneeze too hard and act like you're thinking about doing something in ministry, I'm going to hear through your sneeze, MTSO, go there, go sit down there, do whatever Dean tell you to do. And by the time they're done with you, come on back and let's keep on rocking. So it's very important, very important.
Do whatever Dean tells you to do is always good advice.
It's good for your life. It's good for your life. There were a couple in the chat box as well about resources. Family, if you go to YouTube and search the Black Church Food Security Network, we've begun organizing so many of the seminars and presentations and things that we've done over this year in particular. So you can go and grab free resources right off of our YouTube page or go to our website, blackchurchfoodsecurity.net as well. Tori sneezed. You sneezed in February and it worked. Amen. Welcome to MTSO. I love it.
Heber, the question, Jen's reposted it, and it's been posted a couple times from Melanie Dobson about resistance to farming. And I've had this experience in the classroom too, where because folks were exploited for the land, they understand the land to be exploitative as opposed to the oppressor being exploitation. But I don't know Melanie's question. I can read it out loud, but did you encounter resistance to gardening out of people's prior ancestral experience of oppression and working the land under enslavement? Black Baptist students in my Eating Together Faithfully course in the seminary where I teach in South Carolina have experienced some resistance when they suggested growing gardens on their Black church land.
Be honest, we've not experienced as much as I thought we would. And thank you for reading that question, Tim. That was the one I was trying to find it. Not experienced as much. And, you know, I wonder to what degree our approach is helpful in engaging and meeting the trauma, the very real trauma related to the stories of enslavement and legacies of enslavement for Africa-descended people. And so, you know, as y'all saw, our approach is about empowerment. It's about, you know, naming the demon, as Dean Richmond has planted in my spirit, the importance of it, naming the demon. So we name the demons of white supremacy. We name the demon of discrimination and enslavement. And meeting that head on, I just wonder what that does to create that room to say, well, fine, now that we've named this demon, I can better see myself confronting that demon and then seeing behind that demon and beside that demon and before that demon, the blessing of the land was always there. Finally, I'll say Richard Joyner, who pastors in North Carolina, who many of you know, he spoke to this trauma as well. And Tim, you may have heard him. I know Grace, you probably heard him say this as well. As he was thinking about land and the trauma around land and saying, man, I don't want to do that farming stuff. I ain't going to do that. And he tells this story about his dad saying to him, Richard, the land never stole from us. The land never robbed us. His daddy said to him, the white man stole our stuff, not the land. And it just made me think about where we place the trauma. How, I mean, even in his dad, in Richard Joyner's dad's comment, redirecting that trauma, it said, no, the land didn't whip our backs. The land didn't shackle our wrists. The land didn't, it wasn't the land. white man did that. And he said that created a kind of an opening for him. And so I just wonder, through that approach and through those kinds of sensitivities to a trauma-informed approach to this work, how that can create space.
I think empowerment is definitely the key. And I will speak solely for myself in this space, in that I came to MTSO in the fall of 2015, and the farm was there, and I saw the farm, but I did not get connected to the farm. It wasn't something that I was drawn into. What I know about farming and slavery, it just wasn't something that pulled me in. But the moment that I stepped on the farm and I saw that the benefits of the farm, and they talked to me from a space of being able to grow food so that I could sustain myself in communities, to grow things that would benefit, not be healthier for me, even because they didn't have all of the various pesticides and things like that on it. It changed my thinking, right? And so I think that the more we're willing to have the conversation and acknowledge the fact that people are walking into this space with feelings, and show it from a place of empowerment, how you are doing it for yourself. So it's not like I'm growing all of this and then giving it to someone else. I'm growing this and using it for myself, my family, and my community. And it takes a different spin on it. But oftentimes we're afraid to have the conversation about the work of the farm and the work of growing food and how it strengthens us. That is where we do the harm, and we allow people to stay in their place of being oppressed or associating goodness with slavery.
Hey, Jen, can you make me think about this? Can you speak a little bit to, I mean, there's such an energy in the air this year, and particularly right now in the political environment, but even prior to the election, demonstrations, protests, marches, this stronger commitment, or at least more public commitment to anti-racism efforts and challenging anti-Blackness wherever. What connections do you see, Jen, between that revolutionary energy and farming and what you saw when you walked onto the campus of MTSO? Are there connections that kind of come together strong for you there?
I think that for me, the connection becomes in how we view and how we reimagine Blackness, right? And so people have implicit biases in regards to what it means to be Black and how you walk out that space. And if you are Black and a farmer, it's because you have a lower educational capacity, XYZ. So we bring these assumptions to that space. And so I think that as we unpack what it means to be Black in America, and the fact that we have a unique skill set and tools that allow us to grow food, to maintain communities, to do what needs to be done to sustain ourselves. But also there's this historical skill set of growing that has been stripped from us. And so bringing value and power back to that, I think, is important, right? And so the more we recognize that, to be Black and do things that our ancestors did is not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. It is historical. It is tapping into our ancestors and the skills that were there to sustain ourselves, is something that we need.
Kathy, were you going to do the question thing, or how you want to do that? Logistics. There's a question asking me to repeat the statement. I actually wonder if Dean Bridgman might want to type what she said in the chat box. But the statement, as I remember, and I paraphrase it, is that one of the reasons we easily refer to the earth as Mother Earth is also related to how easily we exploit the bodies of women, particularly Black women. And that's a statement that somebody in the Q&A asked me to repeat. And that's my paraphrase, but I remembered in a sermon, and it shook all of us in the most powerful and beautiful way. So I invite Dean Bridgman to write in the box how she would like to say that in the chat area. And then Kathy, I see what you wrote. So I'm going to say, So, and Tori Lambert has a question here too that I'll read out, but probably Heber, Jen, and then I can try to answer too. But well, I'll answer because I always. But what are the visions of future for all? I understand we will need to reimagine due to the current situation, but where do y'all see these ministries going from here? And so, I don't know if y'all want to step up and answer that question for Tori about what are visions of the future that we have for all, for within the Black church food security and that work. I mean, part of this for me is there is no going back to what we were. And so whatever arises out of the future will be because people come together in a radically different way. And part of this for me is to remain in conversation with Heber and with others who have shown just kind of a visionary genius that all of us can participate in and hope to call a new world into being. We have not seen the extent of the darkness. That won't end with whoever's declared the president at the end of this week. In fact, there's great opportunities going to get significantly worse. And we have decisions to make. We can pull together or we can come apart. And what I would encourage people to do is to find the people in your life that you can trust and that you can be in deep conversation with, and you can build towards communities of love and loving practice and turn to them soon and begin to do that together. But others, I want to have that question. What are your visions of the future and how do you see this coming?
So Tori, I think that's a great question. I mean, for me personally, I have the belief that once you know better, you should do better. And so for me, education is key. So I am one who is adamant about teaching and training and engaging people in this work. And so I do a lot of work with youth and young adults. And so it starts with being able to just tell the story. So taking the history that Heber has so eloquently put together for us, right? And building upon that and allowing themselves to see themselves as a part of that history and adding to that, taking the time to learn the skills. And so I went through a Master Urban Farmers course where I learned how to grow things. What are the legal rules? What are the business rules? What are just the practical abilities of doing this work in this community? And then I take that knowledge and I teach it to other people so that they have that same access to information and that we can collectively take what we have learned in regards to food apartheid, food access, food sovereignty, and then respond to it ourselves. It's about teaching and training and empowering yourself and those around you to do the work.
I'd also add, MTSO, we've been involved in this in as intentional ways as we have been able to dream together. But we're still learning along with all of you and along with every partner that comes along. And what we've discovered a lot in the local food scene is a lot of competition, sometimes some division, not always, but probably representing other areas of our cultures and our communities. And I think this helps me, this is how I think at least, to think about the ways that we're partnering with Eating Together Faithfully, for example, and that whole framework about getting back to conversations, meaningful, deep conversations with one another around the table. And I think right now we're so hungry for that kind of interaction in our communities that figuring out ways to be able to do that in our churches is one practical way forward. Another piece is this youth piece that you've talked about, Jen. Some of the most powerful moments that I've been able to witness from where I stand in the community food and wellness work is when the children and youth from the surrounding areas are able to come to campus, be a part of the farm, do a scavenger hunt, check out, try to find different vegetables, learn about the land, and then go eat it and have fun together in that process of learning. So I'm just echoing with you the kinds of imagination that we can think about some very basic things that we can't take for granted in the times that we're in, connecting with each other and teaching our children and our youth and being humble in this work together that we're learning all the time.
I like to talk about I like to talk about constellations a lot. And so when you ask me, like, what is the future? What can it look like? You know, I love thinking about, and my hands, when I talk about this, my hands just automatic, my body responds when I get to certain things in my brain. So this is what my body is doing right now. And it's doing this, right? And so it's like the imagery in my head is like a grandfather clock, or it's a constellation of stars. It's like doing what you said, Tim, like looking at communities of organizing, cultivating communities of care. And oftentimes what I've seen in my experience, Tim, these communities exist already, even if they're not named a community of care. You know who to call when you need a little bit more sugar. You know who to call when you need somebody to watch the child for a minute. I need to go do something real quick. We have these communities of care. And I wonder the opportunity that we have now to even formalize them even more, to just name it. If we name in demons, let's also name our angels. Let's name the angels that are in our circle, in our lives, and just work to link that together even more. So what I see I'm doing and what I'm trying to do, y'all, with my whole little life is be a pollinator in the Black church community around this type of thinking, with full recognition that there are other parts of the garden that need equal tending. But I'm trusting that the chief gardener, the head gardener, has other bees pollinating. And so the pollinating that's going on at MTSO, it's wonderful, producing a wonderful garden that we're all bearing witness to right now. And we also could say, for those of us who know of other gardens, wonderful work being done, for instance, new president, Matthew Williams at ITC. And he's nurturing, he's turning the soil over, he's cultivating, because they want to be a garden down there in the South, in Georgia. And it seems like Georgia feels like flipping right now. We just praise God for flipping Georgia. So these pockets, and Tim knows far more, Dean knows far more. I'm just saying these gardens are all over the country, and the pollinators are buzzing and carrying pollen back and forth. And I'm grateful for how more and more this is happening. We've got to tend well. What I've learned this year, Tim, Jen, I've been talking about gardening for a long time and farming for a long time. This year has made me sit down and tend well to my own garden. While my garden was drying up, I'm traveling the country telling everybody else about the importance of growing food, and my garden is shriveling. This year says sat down. And when I sat down and tended well to my own garden, I learned, Kathy, that I needed to be a good gardener at my house anyway. The level of attentiveness. I learned my tomato plants, I learned my green pepper plants, and I learned that if I just give a casual look, I might miss that caterpillar or that bug that's eating up my stuff. I got to get close to it. So y'all, I'll end with this. I'm just trying to get so close to the Black church community garden that I see some trends and traditions and lines. And if others are doing, and I know they are, doing that same kind of engagement and vocation and doing that deep attentiveness, when we talk together, when we come together, whoo, the dreaming goes to another stratosphere. Because I can tell you about these tomato plants over here in this garden. I sing to them in the morning. I know them by name. So anyway, let me stop. But yes, daily. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And, Heber, that brings to mind that I'm grateful for kind of some of the praise that we're receiving at this institution, but there are other institutions doing interesting work. And I think that there's several institutions that are our size that are cultivating an ecological vision that live in the shadow of other schools that maybe have more power and more structure. And we need to not strive towards those visions of power, but come together. I know Melanie teaches at one of these. Memphis has been mentioned, ITC with Matthew. for those of us who have kind of an ecological vision, I think it's time for many of us in theological education at institutions our size and our visioning to come together and say, let's rethink what we want pastors to be, what we want the church to be. And I know that, there are individuals out there doing. Matthew's one of them. Melanie Dobson, who's in this, is another there. Pete Gaffney and others at Memphis. And that conversation got COVIDed, if that's I use that word in multiple ways. It's even 4 letters sometimes, but that's part of what we can do as an institution too, is not hold it as if it's a light under a bushel, but allow it to be out there and to be in conversation. A few years ago, Heber, you participated in the Seminary Hill Colloquy, and that's another space that I think we can renew at MTSO, where we brought in colleagues from other institutions, more women than men, more people of color than white folks, and to try to cultivate a conversation that challenges the structures of racism within theological education, particularly around ecological vision and food. And I think those spaces need to be cultivated even more. Yeah.
Hey Tim, Dean said what? Tim quoting scripture? I said the same thing. He gonna put a tie on in a minute. He gonna shock all of us. Go ahead, Pastor Tim.
There won't be, unless somebody in this room passes away, there will not be a tie.
Can I offer this too? And this is something, this is a real pastoring in real time type of situation. This coming January is our annual church meeting in our church. And this is the first budget that we're working on as a congregation since the beginning of this pandemic. It's the first. So we made some adjustments this year. But in terms of like establishing a church budget with the full knowledge of what is going on right now, politically, public health, going down the line. And I must say, I'm inviting your prayers, because I do not think that our next budget as a church should look like every other budget we've always done, because we're living in a year we've never seen before in our lifetime. And so I am one that tends to be given to righteous risk taking. I just, whatever, let's try it. But I'm also saying, please pray for me, because if there ever was a year to try something and different configurations, moving the money in different places, like I'm thinking, do we need to put farmers on the budget? Do we need to have a church farmer? Do we need to have, like, those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. We have a freedom school. Do we need to hire a freedom school director like now? And then frankly, and because it's just us, I share this with y'all, even looking at how do I adjust my salary, right? Bring that down. Because in a local church, sometimes the full-time pastor is like the only full-time position that you can afford for some churches. Now, not all churches, not New Salem, but other churches. And, but I'm having conversations with our leadership, and I'm thinking through with our family, like, all right, with my family, like, okay, if we adjust my salary, let's bring that down, make some room to do some other creative collaborations and configurations so that we can squad up. Like if Congress got a squad, why can't Pleasant Oak get a squad? We need a squad for the kind of year we about to have and the kind of year that we're in. So I say that for all the pastors, local pastors who are watching this right now, let us lean deeply into the spirit and listen very deeply, and lean and connect with each other, because trying to engage those kinds of conversations and questions all by myself, it gets daunting in my head. But talking with others from the seminary level, the local church level, and just trusted friends and stakeholders, it becomes a part of those congregational communities of care. That if we want to walk on water a little bit, where are my walking buddies? Let's walk.
Yeah, We're approaching the end of our time together here, and so you're making that segue. And I also saw one final question in the chat that I feel like also helps with thinking about what's next. How can we use our church lands to invite the beloved community around us? Where I live, the public land is very difficult to permit for community garden use. I wanted to bring that out because Heber, I was also going to go back to your attentiveness to the land that all of us can be a part of. I remember a sermon that you preached sometime at MTSO about walking around the church and seeing a blade of grass. I don't know if you remember this sermon or the scripture, and you thought, this land is not dead. That blade of grass is living. It's alive, and the hope that kind of renewed in you as you were looking at this space that was called something else by so many others. So thinking about this question, thinking about how we think about our land. I don't know if you want to respond to the question directly, but I will just say that at the end of this, we will put up our contact information because we want to continue to figure out ways to stay connected. How do we stay, those of you on this call who have participated in this time, continue to encourage one another, get involved with the work. Heber's email will be there. Our Community Food and Wellness Initiative email will be there. And you can contact any of us. I'm sure the staff at Life Around the Table says the same sort of thing, but with that sort of rounding, I don't know. Heber, you want to respond to that question, beloved community?
I'm sorry, because you got my brain thinking. I was like, now what did I preach?
So the question was specifically about how do we use our lands to invite the beloved community around us? I got confused myself, but to say, that's a barrier for people, and so we leave this sort of time together and we say, what's next? What do we do? So speak into that, would you?
Yeah, super quick, I will. Dean said that sermon was gloriously blasphemous. I saved my most heretical sermons for MTSO. I'm like, I can't preach this in my church. So when I come to MTSO, I'm letting all the bricks off, man. But I was preaching. I was like, this is a safe place for all my blasphemy. But I was preaching about the story that many of us growing up in church, we've heard it, about the feeding of 5,000. And what caught my eye in the story, and it's Matthew chapter 14. What caught my eye in the story was, it says Jesus and his disciples went out to a deserted place. And it said deserted multiple times, which led me to believe as the reader that there was no life there. But then as a part of the miracle, Jesus not only took the 2 fish and 5 loaves, but Jesus said, have the people sit down on the grass. And my ecological awakening made me pay attention to that there was life in that deserted place. If there was grass there and microbes and everything else. And I guess in that same spirit, walking around our church spaces and our local congregations can invite that same kind of curiosity maybe about things that we've overlooked. Just like that familiar passage, I had just ran right on through and right on over the grass being named in the text. It was inconsequential in my reading of the story. In fact, it was inconsequential, that plot of land in our front yard. I'd never thought about it before as anything like worth paying attention to. But that day invited me to see it differently. And so for those of us who are blessed to steward church spaces in community with others, that kitchen that sits there largely unutilized Monday through Saturday could bear witness in powerful ways to the providence of the Almighty, especially in a year like this. What more could it be besides just the kitchen ministries space? And you better not go in there. What could our classrooms be in a time where so many of our children are in the house, and some families are having struggles with internet and Wi-Fi and connecting with the educational experience? Do our churches have any blades of grass saying, hey, I'm right here. What about the church buses? Now, listen, I'm raising the question. I'm not pretending to have the answers, but I'm saying there's blades of grass all up and through our church spaces. And there might be some prophets beyond the building of the church that can help speak into how it can be utilized in partnership and service during this time. So that now, if I was to list out all the ministry partners at Pleasant Hope, I got to list the land. I have to. The land is a partner, and we're in service to that land, and the land is a partner in ministry. The kitchen is a partner in ministry. The van is a partner in ministry. The people who, when they come down off the choir, and the choirs can't come together and sing like that no more, no way, what other genius and gifts have God placed in them that we can reconfigure? And I'll say this finally, that this is as good a time as any to take some chances. I've experienced some grace in the risk taking I've done this year, because people are more sensitive to the fact that, number one, it's a pandemic. Number two, we have a lot of loss and grief that we've experienced. And there seems to be, at least amongst many quarters of our congregation, a greater patience and understanding with the attempts that we're making to stay together. And so if they're going to give more grace in our pastoring and ministering right now, why not try some things that go beyond what we've never done before? So that's what I'll share.
Thank you all. I guess I was off mute. Thank you. Reverend Dr. Brown, it's always great to have you with us. For the Life Around the Table staff from yesterday, and you're with us today, Tim, Jen, Dean, everyone that has been sharing today. Stay connected. We see the Mighty Network email from Grace. Just get on the websites, Life Around the Table, MTSO, Black Church Food Security Network. Reach out if there's something burning. We're in this together. Go in peace.